Rabbi so-and-so said this. Yeah, but Rabbi so-and-so said that. Rabbi so, and you don't finish that. You don't ever say, okay, we finished this one. It's an ongoing thing. So here's the tale. Somebody with a wonderful name, Nathan of the Radiance. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Jack of the Insight. A tale that was concerned with, quote, opening the portals of the heart to Torah. Isn't that wonderful? Like, that's the point. How to open the portals of the heart. Ephesians uses a similar title, opening the eyes of the heart. Opening the portals of the heart to Torah. And you know that Jews have a hard time saying the name God, so they often use circumlocutions as a way of you know what the name God has in this story? He who opens and does not close. He who opens and does not close. Now, we usually point at other people who are wanting to close either the meaning of a text or bring closure by means of the Bible. It's always somebody else who's proof texting. It's a temptation we all face. Many of you will be aware that in the 2nd century already, the church leader Marcion wanted to get rid of Moses and all the prophets. And his suggestion is, let's take Luke and some of the letters of Paul, and that will be our Bible. Church pushed back hard. But Marcion, the reason why Marcion wanted to do this is because the God that we read about in the scriptures can't possibly be the God of love that we learned about from Jesus. So let's have a different Bible. And the church pushed back. It did accept Luke, but also 3 other evangelists, and not only Paul, but more of Paul, and Peter, and James, and John. And it took a long time, but also the book of Revelation. And it added that and said, we want this big Bible. And in fact, for most of the history of the church, the Old Testament is bigger than it has been for the Jews. It's a very comprehensive understanding of how big the archive should be. Many of us Anabaptists are vulnerable to being practical Marcionites. In many of our Bibles, the covers are kept apart by only a few passages. Very thin pamphlet. We often are drawn to literature that likes to drive a wedge between the real Jesus and the Jesus of the church. We're reading that kind of literature in our churches many times, thinking that this is the real Jesus. Alienating Jesus both from his Jewish moorings and from the church that got excited about him. The only source of information we have on him. We think Paul was a Lutheran and we're Mennonites and Jesus was a Mennonite, and so we don't read Paul. And because we don't watch those TV channels, we also don't read the book of Revelation. Now, there are others among us who are deeply troubled by what they see as a kind of disparaging of the Bible and its authority. And we often then reach for a kind of understanding of inspiration that I think doesn't, in my humble view, doesn't quite fit the Bible. So let me offer an alternative. I'm trying to keep my eyes on the watch here. Yesterday in worship, the Gospel of John was referred to in the phrase, the Word made flesh. I think that's actually a wonderful way of thinking about the Bible. When you think about how it came about, and I've just hinted at some of that, think about the Bible as the Word becoming words, the Word becoming scrolls, pages, book, and in the reading, flesh all over again. Incarnation is translation. And translation runs to the very heart of our faith. You know, it's really interesting. As best we can tell, and I know, Rudy's here, he might, is a gospel specialist, but I don't think we have any evidence that Jesus ever wrote anything other than in dust. which is a really interesting kind of thing to think about on a weekend like this. So he took our Bible and wrote on there, "Read." But Jesus entrusted his teachings to his followers. An unbelievably risky thing, because they weren't archivists. Maybe there was a scribe or two among them. They were gossips. We call them evangelists. What risk? If you were interested in controlling the message, would you give it to an impetuous, unreliable fisherman like Peter? If you were interested in controlling the word of grace, would you give it to an opinionated Pharisee like Paul? Evidently, God isn't nearly as squeamish as we would be. "I thank you, Father," Matthew 11, "Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants." And remember Paul's words to the Corinthians, that bunch. "Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you have noble birth, but God chose what is foolish, weak, low, and despised in the world, with which to put together the witness to his word in the world." The life of Jesus tells us that incarnation is terribly vulnerable and infinitely miraculous. Which means that when the word becomes words on pages and so on, that vulnerability marks also that. We should not expect of the Bible something that it isn't. It is witness to God's entrusting the message to infants and fools and weak and those who are of humble birth. In John 6, Jesus says, "The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life." And Gospel of John also says, "The Spirit blows where it wills." And you don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know where it's going. So it is everyone who is born of the Spirit. Is that why we have 4 Gospels? Now, we might wish it were different, especially when we're standing at the fork in the path and there are ditches on all sides. We might wish for something less vulnerable, less human, more manual-like. But God has met us in our reality. Yes, we're fallen and sinful, but there is nothing fallen or sinful about being communal, historical, enculturated, local, distinctive. Those are not signs of the fall. Those are signs of God's good creation, and we see them on every page of the Bible. Sure, that gives us some issues and problems in interpretation. But let's take pleasure in that, because every time we have to expend that reality, we can give God thanks that He has met people like us. That's not a sign of sin. That's a sign of God's grace and the wonder of God's creation. We need Bible scholars. But we need Bible scholars with enormous skills. But most especially, we need Bible scholars who are driven by a hunger for the Word and who develop skills not just of meticulous dissection. Sort of, my daughter's in med school, and the first thing they get a cadaver. Some of us Bible scholars treat the Bible like a cadaver. We know how it once worked. Can we be like surgeons who can use the scalpel and the needle and put this together so that this body can stand up and talk to us and make our hearts burn? We need theologians who know at least as much about the Bible, if not more, than they do about other theologians. It's not a shot. It isn't. It's just that what's happening also in our community is that the Bible scholars and the theologians are going into separate silos. And the one consequence is that the community doesn't know how to do theology with the Bible and vice versa. It's critically important. We need preachers and pastors who argue with your congregation if your congregation insists on really short sermons so that you can never get to the Bible. Especially if you no longer have Wednesday evening Bible study, which is a dim memory for most of us. Make sure that when you work with the Bible, people hunger for more. Learn to play with matches. We need congregations who respect the hard work people do working on the Bible, but who also recognize that they don't defer to them as if they're the Bible bosses, but that they are actually servants enabling all of us together to discern and hear the Word. It's a tough one. If we can't get that one right, we'll be impoverished very soon. Because Bible scholars ultimately need a constituency for their work. I'm going to close with a wonderful image. We just had Mennonite World Conference, General Council meetings and so on, and we took a tour. Well, let me back up. Have you ever seen films? If I had worked ahead properly, I might have given you a video now, although there wouldn't have been time for it anyway, of Orthodox Jews dancing with the Torah. Have you seen that? I've often thought, what if we could do that? And usually people smile at me indulgently, thinking I'm just joking. I'm not. So here we are at Mennonite World Conference, and we made a visit to Schleitheim. Many of you know the word Schleitheim, the Schleitheim Confession. Well, there's a tiny little museum there, and they actually have one of the 4 very early copies there. But what struck me, apart from that wonderful thing, was that in the entrance, there was a notice up on the wall for an event coming up at Pentecost in the local parish church. It was called Tanzen zur Bibel, dancing to the Bible. And I'll translate, I won't give you the German here, but I'll translate what it said. With simple dances and texts, we will let the spirit of Pentecost give us wings. Bring comfortable shoes. I love that line. But then came this. Participation without dancing is permitted. I don't think that should be allowed. I think there is altogether too much non-dancing participation when it comes to how we use the Bible in the church. Burning hearts can't wait to dance, right? You know, it's an interesting thing. I thought of this. I was going to put some images on, but I thought of an image of somebody coming in full armor, and I know some of you know about Ephesians 6. I do too. Somebody coming in full hermeneutical armor, hardly able to walk, invited to the dance. It's not a pretty sight. It's hard to dance in full hermeneutical armor. It's far easier to be a naked Anabaptist. So I have a proposal for Melissa and Russ and Menno Media. Naked Anabaptists can dance. And I don't want to be asked about the cover. I just know that they'll be wearing comfortable shoes. Now, I'm making one huge assumption in this whole talk, and that is that beyond all of our differences, that we already share a basic commitment to the Bible as our authority for faith and life. I suspect that's a bit of an optimistic assumption, especially if we think about the church as a whole. But we have to work at strengthening so that that assumption is real. But behind that, it's not our trust in the Bible that matters. It's our trust is in the God to whom the Bible witnesses. That is why we want to dust off the Bible. We trust the God to whom it gives witness and who empowered people to give witness to God's ways. We don't trust God because we trust the Bible. We trust the Bible because we trust God. It's an act of faith, always, for us to read the Bible, for us to grant it authority. For us to dust it off is an act of faith. Faith as trust. May God give us wings to fly, ears to hear, eyes to see, hearts that are ignitable, and feet nimble enough for dancing. Bring comfortable shoes.